And welcome to Weather and Ag in Focus on this finally Friday, May 9th. And it's a smoky one out there. We've got smoke that has poured in from Manitoba with these northerly winds behind a cold front. Bridgette, I'm not sure if it's tariffed smoke or non-tariffed smoke, but either way, it's kind of thick out there in some areas.
I noticed this morning it looked like there was rain to the north because it's got that hazy look to the skyline, but also realizing that was likely just the smoke, as you were saying. And it's been pretty thick. And if you think it's bad here, I've got a lot of calls from up around that Devil's Lake area. They definitely are getting the brunt of it even before we are. So quite a bit going on out there.
Yeah, just looking out the window here, I can tell over the last hour how it's gotten a little thicker, a little hazier. But like you said, Bridgette, from Grand Forks up through Devil's Lake Basin, that's where it's the thickest, where visibility is down below 2 miles. And this is producing some poor air quality, too. So if you're sensitive to that, you might want to limit your time outdoors as we head into the afternoon. But the good news is this will be out of here as we head towards tonight. So
that'll be excellent.
One good
thing.
People,
and it couldn't hang around. If we're going to have 40-mile-an-hour winds, it pretty much has to go, doesn't it?
It's going back into Canada. Yeah, it'll be blowing back north. Yeah. But we do have quite a bit of heat coming our way as we head into the upcoming weekend. But for the rest of today, we're looking at temperatures in the upper 70s to near 80 in the Southern Valley, a little cooler, but not by much in the Northern Valley. And again, Northern Valley, we're seeing that smoke the thickest. And this will continue to press south as we head throughout the day, with temps remaining pretty steady from where they're at right now, right around the upper 70s to near 80, with breezy north winds at 10 to 25. And again, that smoke should diminish as we head towards the evening, as winds turn lightly to the southeast. It's going to be a cool one overnight tonight with lows in the low 40s. So for the Minnesota fishing opener tomorrow, it's going to be a cool start, but the lakes should be pretty calm as winds will be light. But as we head towards lunchtime, those winds will pick up out of the southeast at about 10 to 25, and highs reaching about 80 degrees. And then as we head into Mother's Day, that's when conditions start to really go downhill in terms of wind, as winds are really going to ramp up 25 to 40 throughout the afternoon. We'll see a few gusts over 40, but nothing approaching 50 or anything like that. It's not going to be that bad, but even with the 30, 40 mile an hour winds, we're looking at just that very windy conditions and high fire risk. The high fire danger is going to be really elevated as we head into Sunday. So don't do any campfires and just use common sense. Although sometimes, again, accidents happen, sparks from machinery or cigarette butts being thrown out. Just, keep that in mind. The wind remains into Monday as well, with highs in the lower 90s, both Sunday and Monday. That'll be approaching record warmth on Sunday. And then we're still hot as we head into Tuesday. We can't really shake the heat, about 3 straight days of it, but winds will lighten up as we head towards Tuesday. And then a good chance of some widespread rain as we head into Wednesday and Thursday of this week. So that will help, especially with the freshly planted crops. Then we get some timely rains on top of that. Now, the problem is, and I had one of our listeners, Philip, emailed me this morning. He's like, Dean, are there any concerns, or do you see any concerns about, and we were talking about this yesterday, Bridgette, about the blowing dirt, the blowing soil, with it being so dry and you're getting 40 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts. Is that going to be a problem? And it's going to take a little more than that, wouldn't it? For the most part, wouldn't you? No. So no. 40 mile an hour winds would cause problems.
Yeah, because you've got a lot of fields that are newly planted and you don't have any plants that are holding them in place. And so with that concern, that wind is going to take all that surface soil and be blowing it up into the air pretty rapidly.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that happens when you've got all that soil, it's if you have, let's say, corn plants that were early planted and you've got like a 2-leaf corn plant, it's going to get sandblasted. All those little particles of soil hitting against it will cause injury. Probably not to the extent that it would break off a small plant out in the field. Sugar beets, they have a 2-leaf, and at that point, they're almost like little helicopter propellers, and they will twist themselves up out of the ground, which will lead to cause for replanting because you can't put them back in the soil, right? There's no way to do that. So I do think the high winds are going to be a concern. They're going to dry out our soil profile. We do have that increased risk for fire danger, as you mentioned, and we will have some plants that do see injury. Will it be enough to have to replant, say, corn? Probably not. Sugar beets, the potential is there for that to happen. All of you home gardeners, if you haven't thought about wind protection on some of your very young transplants, all those little tomato plants that sit in the wind and just blow back and forth, that will make that plant break off at the soil surface and that plant will die. So you're going to want to make sure that maybe it's a time to go find some sort of solid fencing to protect them. Maybe you want to get some buckets, cut the bottom out of it, put the buckets or the plastic coffee can over the top of your plants to protect them in that wind. That's why Grandma did it. So many of us remember Grandma cutting out the bottom of a coffee can and putting it over her tomatoes and peppers. That was wind protection. And oftentimes plants don't have a thick and sturdy main stem in order to protect themselves. So yeah, this wind will be tough on a lot of different things that we're gonna have to watch out for. Um, for those who are gonna fly drones, like we have a client hire drone service, their agri service out of Leonard, and those folks have drone spraying service. They're gonna have to shut down for a few days because the drones won't be able to carry in that kind of a wind. I'm pretty sure on their pilot's licenses as well, that'll be a concern. And depending on the product that you're spraying, you can't be out in over 10-mile-an-hour winds. So those folks, we're going to have hires in the studio with us here in May. We're going to talk about some of those conditions and what that changes for them when they are having to spray. But keep them in mind when you are thinking about doing some follow-up spray after the wind dies down. Our big ground machines, we definitely have to follow the rules on the labels, whether it is a 3 to 10-mile-an-hour restriction. You can't be out there over 10 miles an hour. That'll stop them. And like on our video yesterday from Rocky Rice from Hunter, that showed a fertilizer spreader with 40-mile-an-hour winds that can also distort patterns on dry material, and we'd have to shut those down as well. So there's a lot of potential of what could have to change during that wind.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so Phil, if you're listening, I messaged him that I don't know what the threshold is, but that we would talk about it on there. So hopefully Philip's listening. He was a little worried about, I think, his crop and a lot of that surface dirt blowing off. So I wish we had better news.
If Phil happens to be out in Western Cass County, I bet I know who it is, and I can probably reach out to him after the show as well.
Okay. So, I will message you in Slack on his last.
That would be great. Yep, no problem. So, but for the other questions that listeners have, we'd love to take them. You can reach us on the JLA Insurance phone line, 701-293-9000. You can send emails like Phil did to weather or ag@flagfamily.com. Also, you can follow us on our YouTube and Facebook pages, WDAY Weather and Ag in Focus, and Acres TV. If you haven't put that app on your phone, your iPad, or wherever, please do. It's a free app, and it's the Netflix of agriculture. Also, one of the things that even though we have this dry heat right now, low humidity, which that's going to affect some of our applications, right? If you were going to spray Liberty or glufosinate, low humidity is not ideal for that particular product. So keep that in mind. You may have poor performance. You're going to have to up your adjuvant rate to overcome that situation. If we turn wet in June, which Dean has mentioned that we could start to see a wetter condition in June, we're going to be watching out for fungicides. That not only includes our hard red spring wheat that we just planted yesterday, that is a Peterson farm seed wheat, which thanks to Peterson for being a part of our Here We Grow project. We appreciate it. But then secondly, we could start to see white mold in our canola. So Summit Agro has a new product called Kenja 400 SC fungicide. They do have a 2EE label here in North Dakota. So that gives you very big flexibility in the rates that you're going to use. Also, we know that when it comes to protecting canola, there's a couple things that hit it hard. One is white mold, the other is flea beetle, and we are already seeing flea beetle emergence in the northern part of the state. These dry, hot conditions are not going to help that situation, which means more applications to try to keep the flea beetles knocked down in our canola fields. So there's a lot going on. We're back in the field agriculturally. We're going to be busy, not slowing down anytime soon.
Busy time of the year, that's for sure. And, well, we've got a returning special guest, Bridgette. I think Dr. Emily Fox has been with us a few times.
Well, she has, and she's fun to visit with. I had several listener questions that I did share with her that we want to talk about today. One of them was something we didn't get to the last time Dr. Fox joined us. That was, why do we dehorn cattle and sheep? What's the reason? What's the methodology of how we do it? Then there is also a question that came up on one of our morning shows when I was talking about naval health in bull calves. The question was, wait, cows have navels? Well, we'll just let Emily answer that. She's far better at physiology in animals than I am. And then also in South Dakota, especially with a drier year, there's something called anaplasmosis. Anaplasmosis, I believe is what it's called. And we're going to ask Emily more about that and if that's a concern, particularly with drier conditions in some states. Do we have to vaccinate? What should we be watching out for at our herds? So we will have her join us right after we touch base on our markets with the American Ag Network. so glad you're joining us here today on Weather and Ag in Focus. As always, there's a plethora of information and ideas. And your technology should work just as smoothly as all that talc and graphite you're running in the corn planter right now. Maybe you just don't want to be covered in it as much. And I bet you don't want to be covered in bad things that can happen when it comes to the internet. And that's where Tech Support Farm with Chris Sherman can come in handy. Chris is busily updating his website. I bet by Monday you're going to be able to go there and do a self assessment. You can do it right from the tractor on his website. And you can figure out what are your needs. What things should you be looking at in cybersecurity, and how can Tech Support Farm help you? The other person who's going to help us tremendously today is Dr. Emily Fox. She's with the Ashley Veterinary Clinic in Ashley, North Dakota. Dr. Fox, is it a quiet day? Have you caught up on all of the calving and so forth that's been going on in your neighborhood?
We call that the Q word. You're actually not allowed to say that word in our clinic because as soon as somebody says it, everything breaks loose.
That's fair.
This is kind of what I call hurry up and wait season. You'll have nothing, nothing, nothing all day, and then several emergencies will happen at once. So it's kind of a weird time of the year for us. Even yesterday, I was doing office work all day, kind of fairly boring, and then I wasn't even the one on call, but we had two calls come in right at like 5 o'clock, and we, had to send two people out. So it's just kind of weird that way, I guess. There's a lot less things that people plan on this time of the year, but as we know, a lot of unexpected things happen during calving season.
Absolutely. So we've had some interesting listener questions in the last few weeks, and I sort of saved them up for you. And one of them, I was on one of our morning shows, and we were talking about dairy calves, bull calves, and that you have to take care with their navel after birth because that could be a point of infection entering the body. And the look on the faces of our morning hosts was, wait, cattle have navels? So can you explain that? Because yeah, I think they do.
So most animals have navels. I think if I remember, and I should have looked this up, but I'm not an expert on marsupials or Australian animals. I think there might be some that maybe don't have to have a navel because of the way that they are in the pouch, but I think they still probably need a navel. Birds, things in eggs don't need a navel because the egg has all the things they need, but navels essentially are how mom and baby communicate. So that's how like the blood supply goes between them. That's how we get urine in and out, right? Because they can't really urinate beforehand. That's how food comes in and out. So navels are super important. Think of it as like the RV hookup of mom and baby. So it's pretty important. So yes, most animals have a navel. Cats have a navel, dogs have a navel. They can both get umbilical hernias, right? Because that's your umbilical cord is actually what your navel is. You can get an umbilical hernia, for example. They're really common in puppies. That's one of the first things I look for at a puppy check is like, is there an umbilical hernia? There's a kind of wild cat running around at my place that I think has a little bit of an umbilical hernia that if it doesn't close up, I'm going to have to catch and fix. So actually, that's not that uncommon. And navels can get infected. That's more common in animals like horses or cows, just because there's usually a bigger stump than there is with other animals. But it can happen in other animals as well.
Well, there we go. We got to answer that question for those who were completely shocked and amazed. But what you said makes sense. It's like the RV hookup between mom and baby. We just didn't consider it, right? When you think about animals, some of those things just don't come to mind right off the bat. So we got one out of the way. That's a great one. Now, one of the other questions that we had, and am I saying this right? Anaplasmosis in cattle?
Yeah, most people would say anaplasmosis or anaplas, a lot of people say. That is a
Okay.
tick-borne bacterial disease. There are actually several types of anaplasmosis, and I won't get into, there's a couple different bacteria that can be carried by different ticks or that might affect different species. I think there is actually a human version of anaplasmosis. I think they can get the same ones that dogs can, but I'm not an expert in people diseases by any means. So it's something that usually is spread by deer ticks, although there are other ticks that can spread it. And it's actually in small animals like cats and dogs, it's actually a fairly common co-infection with Lyme. I think something like 10 or 15% of Lyme
Mhm.
disease cases will also have Anaplasma marginale, or I'm sorry, phagocytophilum, which is the one that cats and dogs get. Marginale is the one that cows get. Slightly different. Uh, Cows can get the dog one, but it's really rare. So the dog one tends to be carried by deer ticks. We don't see much of it down here. because we're still kind of on the edge for deer ticks. We're seeing, there's definitely people in Fargo who report it. We've seen dogs that come from Minnesota certainly having it. There's a ton in Minnesota because they're kind of on that Lyme disease, deer ticks moving west wave. We know it's imminently coming, but we don't have very much of it yet. But it's a bacteria that's spread by ticks. You can test for it either by doing a blood smear, so actually looking at the blood under the microscope and seeing these little tiny dots that will form in the red blood cells of the cats or dogs. Or the other thing that you can do is you can actually take 4DX test, which is our Lyme and Ehrlichia test. That also has anaplasma in it, and that's considered more reliable and quicker. So it's a really simple snap test. So you just take a little bit of blood, you mix it with some reagents, you put it on the bench top, you pour the cup of blood onto the little test, which you actually snap down. It's a kind of a cool technology, and then other reagents run back over it, and it almost looks like a COVID test. It just has a few little dots on it, and we can know within 15 minutes if an animal has antibodies to anaplasmosis or not. So it's an ELISA tested antibody test. Anaplasmosis can cause like a fever, lethargy, low appetite because it's affecting your red blood cells. So that affects your ability to carry oxygen and your energy level. Certainly, if animals are spending a lot of time out in the woods, it's something to look at. In the acute phase, it'll kind of make them feverish, and that looks a lot like Lyme as well. So that's another good reason to take your dog in. Now, in cattle, you tend to see a lot of anemia things. People used to call it, I think, yellow bag back in the day because they would actually get jaundice from being so anemic. So that's something to be looking for. In cattle, it can also be spread by things like shared needles, which I know that sounds really weird to somebody who's not in the livestock industry that needles might be shared, but it is fairly commonplace when somebody's working, several hundred head to change needles, say every 10 or every 20 head, if they're all from the same family, essentially, if they're all from the same place. So if you know you have anaplasmosis in your herd, you start changing needles every animal. There's a lot of prevention strategies. There is, to my understanding, a vaccine that came out fairly recently for anaplasmosis. It is licensed in both North and South Dakota. I don't know how effective it is because I have no experience with it, but I think somebody at Louisiana State came up with it, if I recall, because this is a much bigger problem down south.
Okay.
And Emily, we've got a question here from one of our listeners, and I kind of relate to this because it's flea and tick season coming up here, and the question was, is there any specific drops or collar that I should use on my dog in terms of flea and tick prevention? Now, this brings me back to when I had my dog. We always gave her drops and put it just on the back of her neck for flea and tick prevention. My neighbor who had a dog or who had a cat refused to do it, saying, "Oh, I heard that causes cancer." What, is this a necessity for dogs and cats this time of the year to have flea and tick prevention, whether it be drops or a collar?
So that's a great question. I actually prefer oral and not drops or a collar, which I'll get back to in a minute. I prefer oral preventatives for where we live. So in terms of multifaceted question, first of all, is flea and tick prevention important for cats and dogs? In my opinion, yes. I mean, it's kind of, certainly not going to force anybody to do it, but we just talked about some diseases that can be spread by ticks. There's quite a few more, and they are getting much more severe in North Dakota. The other thing is, over time, even ticks that don't spread disease can suck enough blood from an animal to kill an animal. I mean, you see that with street kittens in other countries. We don't see it as much here because most people are pretty good about pulling them off. You don't have to do it by any means, but certainly by not preventing ticks, you are leaving your dog open to those things, also to being potentially very itchy. I've seen dogs self-traumatize, same thing with cats, trying to get the ticks off so they can get secondary infections from scratching, opening a hole, and then getting a bacterial infection. The other thing to consider is fleas. So from a personal standpoint, regardless of how much you care about your pet, fleas are a little different than ticks in that they survive really well off of the animal. So they are just saying that 10% of the fleas are on the animal and 90% are in the environment. So unlike ticks, where, if you get them off your dog, you're unlikely to bring them into your home, fleas are really hard to get rid of. They're in your dog's bed. I usually tell people, if your dog has fleas, whatever number of fleas are on that dog, there's 9 times that number floating around potentially your home now, and they'll continue to reinfect as well. So in those cases, that's where I recommend you got to take down, if you have fabric curtains, you've got to wash them on hot and get them, you've got to shampoo your carpets. You have
Wow.
to wash all the dog's bedding, pretty much anywhere the dog could go that the fleas could live, because they do such a good job surviving off that dog. A lot of people actually flea bomb their houses, which is not great either, but we sell flea bombs still, because sometimes you just have to
Mhm.
bomb it for a little bit and walk out. Flea bombs do not explode. That probably shouldn't say bomb on the radio, but they are flea misters.
There we
There
go.
you go. That's a great example.
But flea
Yeah.
bombs do not explode. I don't know. I think they're flammable, but like it's not something that like bombs your house. It's kind of a misnomer. But in any case, sometimes you actually do have to do your whole house, and it can get really expensive. You got to treat every pet in your house. Like fleas are kind of a nightmare. Also, some dogs have what's called flea allergy dermatitis. I had this with my dog when I was a kid. So she was on flea and tick prevention, but the problem was she had this flea allergy. So it's sensitizing. Every time they get exposed to a flea, it gets worse. Now, we had rabbits that used to live in our wood pile because I lived in the Northeast where it's a lot more wet and detritusy. And the rabbits had left a bunch of fleas in this wood pile, and she would go looking for them. She was a little dog. And it got to the point where the saliva of the flea was so antigenic, so allergy promoting to her body, that if she got bit by one flea, she would try to take her own tail off. And so even though we didn't find any
Oh,
fleas on the dog, we knew that the dog was having this massive allergy reaction, and that can develop over time. So it's really better to just not let your dog get infected with fleas and not let that happen. It was unavoidable for us, and we did do flea and tick. Now, the second part of this question is, what do I recommend for prevention? I recommend something from your vet. I know there's like products that they sell at Walmart, and I'm not trying to say you've got to buy everything from your vet. I'm not in the business of selling products. I don't push dog food. I'm not that, we don't push that kind of mentality here, but it's really important to get this from your vet. The stuff that you can get over the counter, I've seen a lot more reactions to, and I really don't recommend it. Your vet may have specific recommendations also curtailed to your animal and their risk level for different things, and that may be a little bit regional too. For example, there was an argument online from in a group that I'm in from some colleagues. The people on the East Coast, I use Bravecto in my clinic. That does not mean that that is the only good product. There are some negative reviews of Bravecto. We go over that with clients. But I like Bravecto a lot because it's a 3-month chew. So the dog eats one pill and it's protected for 3 months. Now, that does not protect against the bite. It only kills once they bite. For us here with our fairly low tick burden, that works pretty well. However, some of my colleagues
mhm.
on the East Coast do that in combination with a Seresto collar, which is not a normal flea and tick repellent collar. That is a special collar that vets sell that has a little bit different active ingredient. That particular collar seems to help keep them from biting as well, because their argument is we don't even want them to bite. But then the argument against that is most people say it takes about 24 hours of a tick being attached for it to spread Lyme. Now there's some new arguments saying no. So there's a lot of debate in the veterinary community is my point, and that debate may be based on where you live. So it's important to speak to your own veterinarian and to have that kind of relationship with your veterinarian to make sure you're getting the right product. What I recommend for this area of North Dakota is going to be very different. West River, it's going to be very different, up by where you guys are in Fargo. Just depends on our risk
Mhm.
level and also the dog's activity level, where the dog is going, if the dog travels. For example, there's a tick that they have down in Texas called the Lone Star tick. The product I like is only actually labeled for the Lone Star tick for 2 months, not for 3. So those are all things you really
Mhm.
want to share with your vet. Like, what do you do with your dog? Do you travel? All of those things, and make sure you're sharing that. I will also say flea collars. I have also seen some dermal reactions too. I've seen some dogs get really irritated under the flea collar. They don't tend to work that well. Frontline, the product that you spray on their back, used to work really, really well years ago. There's more and more resistance to it. Again, I certainly don't want to get on here and trash talk a product. Who knows, maybe Frontline will
Sure.
come for me. But in all seriousness, all those products that are topical, there's just more and more resistance to, and they're finding them to be less and less effective over time. And there were some animals that ended up with a hyperesthetic reaction to that. So they would feel it and get really uncomfortable. Some are just more sensitive than others. I have super sensitive skin. It's probably the type of thing that would give me eczema if I was a cat. So I'm not a big fan of topicals, but some people are very uncomfortable with the idea of giving their animal another drug orally. If that's true, there are
Yeah.
some more modern porons. There are some other porons that you can't get over the counter that are significantly better because they are newer drugs, and you should talk to your vet about that.
And real quick, Emily, before we go to break, should this be year-round protection for our dogs and cats, or just during this time of the year?
Oh, this is a very controversial question. Um, I do not personally This is a very controversial question. The American Veterinary Medicine Association would probably tell you yes, and I certainly don't want to go against that recommendation. It largely depends on your risk area, and this is again where I would talk to your vet. If I lived somewhere, I will be honest, on my personal dogs, I only do it in the summer because our risk is very low. However, we don't have a lot of rabbits by my house that have fleas around. We don't have any contact with other dogs that might be carrying ectoparasites. We don't travel, and our area is a little different, and we don't have really a lot of endemic Lyme or anaplasmosis coming up yet. That being said, generally it is recommended to stay on it year round. It is an informed consent thing. I do discuss it with all of my clients. We have some clients that are on it year round. I think that's absolutely great. I do think in the vast majority of the United States, probably almost everywhere, dogs should be on it year round, but I do still handle that on a case by case basis. And I guess if there's any takeaway from the way I practice medicine, it's that have a good relationship with your veterinarian and handle things on a case by case basis. Don't take anything that I say here as gospel. If you don't have that relationship where you feel like you should can talk to your vet about those things, find someone you can talk to, because we really do want to help your animal, and it is really important to make sure that you're getting recommendations that are really specific to your animal and where you live.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Emily. Well, we're up on the bottom of the hour break. We're actually a little late, but that's okay. If you have any questions for Dr. Fox, shoot us a call, 701-293-9000. Again, that's 701-293-9000. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back here to Weather and Ag in Focus, and today is all about livestock. So, Dr. Emily Fox with the Ashley Veterinarian Clinic in Ashley, North Dakota, is joining us. A question I had coming in from a listener one day was, why do we dehorn and or how? And my very generic answer would be because horned cattle can cause injury to humans and each other. Is there something more than that? And can you talk about how people do dehorn their cattle?
Sure. So dehorning is kind of one of those things that everyone seems to have an opinion on. Um, I have a breed of cattle that could be horned or could be polled. I choose to try to breed for polled because I really don't like dehorning. I do occasionally get
Mm.
horns. And everybody has a different opinion on how it should be done as well. I actually spent some time working in England, and we had to either sedate or give pain control and block dehorns, or it was actually not legal. So there's actually quite a bit of law in most of Europe and other countries that doesn't allow for dehorning without pain control. And I try not to ever do any dehorning without pain control. It's just kind of a non-negotiable for me if I'm doing it personally. However, a lot of people
Mhm.
dehorn their own, and that's not a requirement. I actually like to do a lidocaine block, so I like to try to block the nerve because this it can be a very painful procedure depending on the size of the horns. And I also like to try to give them pain relief, either in the form, usually an and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like Banamine or Meloxicam. Uh, I'm of the opinion that dehorning is best done either early or not at all, meaning that you should either do it when they're quite young before the horns develop a lot of blood flow, or potentially you should
Mhm.
try to breed not for horns. I really, really, I'll be honest, I dislike dehorning yearlings and above. I think it's a lot harder on them. I think they go off feed. There's studies that prove that, even with all the pain control that I try to do. There's also some risk of blood loss. So, depending on the size of the horn, there's a lot of different ways you can dehorn. So, you can use a Barnes dehorner, which is kind of it almost looks like a big tongs, but it essentially opens like this, and there's two little knifed edges, and it kind of scoops out the horn base. Hopefully, so they won't come back, because if you don't really get the horn base, the horns may grow back, and usually they grow back awkwardly. And then there's also things like tipping horns. So you might just cut and not try to get the horn sinus. Usually that's my favorite if they're older. That means we're just trying to cut the horns down to a level where they're safe for other animals. They do absolutely cause an impediment, horns, over time. First of all, you're right, it's unsafe for people and other animals in some situations. The other problem is they don't really
Mhm.
fit well with our modern ag systems. So I have a client that has some longhorns. We can't preg check his longhorns anymore because we cannot physically get them down the alley and into their chute to catch them. They have to turn their head like this, but eventually they can't do
Oh.
that anymore. The other thing is, if you've ever seen an animal at a sale barn that has busted its horn off and is bleeding all over the place, it's not fun for these animals if they bust their horns. It can be hard for them to travel. And you will see some animals, particularly, I'm not picking on longhorns, but sometimes like older
Mhm.
longhorns, where the weight of their horns is actually traumatic or troublesome for them. So horns do require some maintenance. Sometimes if it's an older animal and we've left the horn, we'll tip it every couple years when we're preg checking. I have a few places where the horns have kind of started to curl down and they're kind of trying to poke into their head. That can happen if they don't grow
Oh.
correctly, depending on the breed and the style of horns. So then you need to tip those to make sure that they don't cause an abscess against the head, because that can be really painful. So the main thing with horns is, if you're going to keep them, you need to maintain them. You need to make sure your facilities are adequate, and you kind of need to be prepared for things that can happen. And if you are going to have horned cattle and breed them and you do want them dehorned, I'm sure your veterinarian would really appreciate doing it early. When possible, if they're, pet cattle or cattle people really like, I've actually done a lot of sedated dehorns. A friend of mine had some Jersey calves that were, pets and possibly show animals that I dehorned a few weeks ago. And I did their beef cattle standing in the chute because they were a little bit smaller, but these jerseys had pretty pronounced horns. And so we actually did lay them out to do them. That way I could do a little bit prettier of a job as well. And then Dr. Andy, my other half, he does some cosmetic dehorns as well. So, sometimes there are show animals that are generally dehorned. That's a whole nother topic, but we'll sometimes dehorn them as well. And that's actually a surgical dehorn where we stitch them up. So there's a lot of different types of dehorns. Usually the types of dehorns I'm doing, where they're not cosmetic, they're just for safety. We'll just cut them off, and then we'll kind of try to pull some veins out. We'll burn that area with a branding iron so that it doesn't continue to bleed. And then we'll usually put some alu spray or something on there. But no matter how much pain control you try to do, it can be somewhat painful. So it is really important to keep that in mind and try to plan ahead for dehorning.
Okay. I've dehorned cattle. I've been around cattle a lot. I just learned a pile of stuff that I never even considered. So thank you. That was incredibly helpful. So much appreciated, Emily.
Thanks.
Oh man. All right. Whew.
She's
I
a
took a
well.
ton of notes
She's just a wealth of information. I love when she's on.
every time.
I love being here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, Emily, we're coming up on break again, so we want to thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend, and don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll have another recap of weather. Talk about the smoke that's funneling down the valley and into the north central part of the state from Canada. That and a couple of ag topics, all when we come back. And welcome back to Weather and Ag in Focus on this Friday afternoon. Temperatures outside in the upper 70s to low 80s in the Southern Valley. A little cooler in the Northern Valley. And if you're wondering what all that haze is out there, that's actually low-level smoke that's blowing in from Manitoba due to those northerly winds behind that cool front that passed through this morning. Some of that smoke is a little dense, causing some air quality problems. Thickest between Grand Forks and Devil's Lake Basin, but again, all that moving southward with the northerly winds. But that should start to thin out as we head towards the evening hours, and that will lead to a clear and we'll call it a crisp night. Low 40s with light winds turning to the southeast. And we'll start off Saturday with light winds, but it will turn breezy as we head into the afternoon. South-southeast winds 10 to 25 and highs around 80. And then windy conditions for Sunday and Monday with highs in the 90s. Now, our record on Sunday is 93. We'll be flirting with that. The record on Monday is 96. I don't think we're going to quite get there then. And then we'll stay in the low 90s all the way into Tuesday. 3 consecutive days in the 90s. I'm going to have to see if that's a record for this early in the season. We'll do some research on that. And then midweek rain next week, Wednesday, Thursday, before things start to turn cooler by the end of next week. And this weather segment is brought to you by Progressive Ag Risk Management Specialists. So a hot Mother's Day weekend, Bridgette, and windy, unfortunately. And like we were talking about earlier, man, that's not what we want to see. 2 straight days of wind gusts between 40 and 45. Not good.
Well, if you're getting gusts 40 to 45, what are we sustained for winds? 30, 35?
We're probably 25 to 30. Yeah, sustained winds.
That's a beating on those plants for a long time, during daylight hours. Speaking of a beating, well, your joints and back, legs, ankles take that during this time of the year when we're all jumping off of equipment. And I caught myself doing it yesterday. When we got to the field yesterday morning, the sun was just coming up. I went on the top of the seed tank to take pictures of the sunrise in our equipment. And when I came back down the ladder on that tank, the ladder on the seed tank does not go all the way to the ground. Makes perfect sense, because if it did, it would get all bent up in the field as it got caught on the soil or going up and down field approaches, etc. So I jumped off the bottom of the ladder. Well, that reminded me that I shouldn't, because whether we're doing that, we're coming off the back of our pickups, off of trucks, whatever the case might be, when you do that, hopping down, you are landing with a force equal to 11 times your body weight. So if you wonder why your ankles hurt, your knees, your hips, all of these things, those are some of our reasons why. When we were young and we thought it was a smooth move to be jumping around in the haystacks or off of the barn loft, etc., maybe, but it really wore out a lot of our joints. And if you're wondering how to try to help yourself a little bit, well, we're not making new cartilage in our bodies. So as farmers, ranchers, let's be careful. Let's not do those jumps. In fact, I even got the recommendation to start carrying a step stool in my pickup for those moments. I know I had to have it last year when I was doing a video for Ellingson Drainage in our Here We Grow series, and I could not get tall enough to turn their pump on and off in our field. So yeah, I carried a step ladder. Probably should do it more often when I'm on stuff.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, because again, we're not getting new cartilage. All those ankles, hips, and knees hurt. Now, one of those new things, though, that we can get, well, that's happening at North Dakota State University. Dr. Tom Peters, who leads the research in sugar beets, was able to get a new harvester for sugar beet trials. See, they haven't had a new harvester since the 1960s. It was probably time, particularly because researchers at NDSU as well as University of Minnesota, when they work jointly, they will go ahead and harvest about 3,500 2-row by 30-foot plots. That's a lot. And it's much smaller than a full-size harvester. So this was custom built. There's a company in Minnesota that's actually owned by a sugar beet farmer. It's called Beam Co. And so they worked very closely with NDSU to build literally a 2-scale or smaller scale sugar beet harvester that can be used throughout the research trials in the region. Sugar beets, as we know, are a main cash crop. We are the largest area for raising sugar beets in the country. And all of that research that we do has to go all the way through harvest. So making sure that we have the right harvesting equipment to do it is going to matter. So good luck to those guys. very exciting that they have the opportunity to use their new planting equipment shortly. And then lastly, Minnesota, the master gardeners have been doing seed trials, and they've got some winners for you. If you're heading out to the greenhouse this weekend and you're looking for some master gardener approved 2025 ideas, these are coming from folks in Minnesota. You can find Calypso as a cilantro. That was one. Happy Rich broccoli. This won out because it has an excellent cooked flavor, which is a big deal for many of us. And then also a yard-long bean. They're called the Yulong Noodlekin. And if you've never grown an Asian long bean, you're really going to like these. They're a great edible performer. So keep those in mind. If you're curious and forget the names of them and you want to head out to the greenhouse, you can always send me an email, ag@flagfamily.com, and I'll be happy to let you know what these are. So I know the feeling. I go to the greenhouse and I am overwhelmed with all the choices and I want to take all of them home. This can help me narrow it down. Yeah, my greenhouse runs are large. And again, a moment of silence for my favorite greenhouse going into retirement. I'm now in the market for someplace new. I'll find it.
You'll find something.
I will.
And Bridgette,
it'll be fine.
Bridgette, I want to wish you a happy Mother's Day. Enjoy your weekend. And to all the mothers out there, have a fantastic Mother's Day. Get out and enjoy the hot summer-like weather. Summers are short enough around here, so get out and enjoy it. But don't go anywhere. The Jay Thomas Show with Tim Flackel is coming up next.